Hello and welcome to the Talk Diaries with me, Tanya Beckett. One of the news strands which has been gripping the UK in the last couple of weeks in particular is the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, who was sworn in just a couple of weeks ago. Now, the point is that Parliament is in recess at the moment, the House of Commons, and he is using this policy void in order really to push his agenda. He's talked about social care, he's talked about housing, or in particular social housing as well, and he's talked about bus fares. But the fact of the matter is that we are in the UK in a considerable amount of debt. We're not alone in this context, but debt is about the size of the economy, not far off anyway. And the UK economy is not forecast to grow very much in the next year or couple of years. So how's he going to pay for all of this? And what is the bigger picture? Well, here, I hope will help me answer those questions is the lovely Vicky Pryce, who is author of the book called, and this is the relevant point, What Politicians Don't Tell You About the Economy. And well, the start of it is Mismanaged Decline. So I think that tells you all you need to know. Politicians, Vicky, are not always great economists. And I'm not convinced by what I've heard from Andy Burnham so far that he has a firm grasp of economics.
Well, it's entirely possible that economics is not his strong point, but hopefully he has reasonable people around him to give him some of the advice, because what I'm arguing in the book, alongside my co-author, Andy Ross, is that one should look at evidence, and there is a lot of evidence that various government departments have from history and sort of experience of analysing what works and doesn't work. So let's hope he looks at that. Of course, he has his own experience at the local level or regional level. And again, it's really rather interesting because there used to be quite a sort of strong focus on levelling up in the past with the regional development agencies. Those, of course, were abolished by the coalition government very early on, and the money going to regions to promote directly economic growth went down very, very significantly after that, and it's only recently been recovering. So he's done well in Manchester, despite all that. So one hopes that he has seen what the benefits and how they can actually be translated into more growth can be.
The problem is, though, that if we raise debt as a country, we're raising that on a national level, aren't we? And so there is a bit of a mismatch there between the fact that we have to raise quite a bit of debt. And as I said at the very beginning, the debt levels, cumulative debt levels, are now about the size of the economy, which is not a comfortable position to be in. Our servicing costs, i.e. interest on that, is also very high. So how does all of this fit with getting that debt level down, or is he simply saying, I'm going to park that problem right now?
I think he's well aware that there is an issue about the debt. If you remember early on, before even the Macclesfield by-election took place, he was uttering sort of various sentences which suggested that perhaps he didn't care very much about the fiscal rules or the bond market in particular. But I think he's changed his mind. There's no doubt about that. And the previous Labour administration was also very conscious of what the capital markets might think, and therefore how expensive our borrowing might be. But there is no doubt that if we are going to be having greater support for the regions, if we're going to be having more help in terms of later life care, and of course, better health service as well, which is one of the things that, of course, Wes Streeting, who's now Defence Secretary, when he was Health Secretary, was pushing, where he put an awful lot of money into that. All that, of course, can give you some benefits, but overall, it's costly. It takes a long time for things to improve. You must be aware of that, hence why it's now become a national conversation. So far, what he has been talking about isn't terribly expensive. So the bus fare cut that he has announced, for example, the VAT cut on electricity bills, which is good news, starting in October, the bus fare one not starting until next year, the review of care brought forward, but not actually until 2027. It's small beer in terms of the overall cost. The question is whether the capital markets will think there's more to come. This is just the beginning of the type of conversation, of course, that may lead to considerably more spending and therefore needing to have more borrowing, or possibly more taxes, and where exactly will the balance be? And I think they'll be looking at that very carefully. For the moment, I'm afraid our rates for borrowing on government bonds remain very high. They're the highest actually in the G7. And that's a big, big issue because we're paying something like 110 billion a year just servicing the debt. And that's not very comfortable. It gets reflected in what mortgage rates people pay as well, and also in what corporates have to pay when they themselves borrow money to invest in the markets.
Yeah, and people forget all of that all of it is linked, of course, and that the markets look at the direction of travel rather than numbers as a snapshot, don't they? So if they get the idea that he's going to go on a spending spree, then that would not be good. So he's got to manage that narrative a bit, hasn't he?
He does, but of course the one interesting thing is if you look internationally, we're really not that bad by comparison to other countries on our debt to GDP ratio in particular. And we have some rules that we follow. But if you look at the US, of course, which can issue its own currency, we can as well. It's an international currency. They could probably print money very easily if they want to. We can up to a point. They have a debt to GDP ratio now approaching, well, it's anywhere between 120 and 130%. France is higher than we are. If you look at Italy as well, so they're in the 120s or thereabouts. So we're not actually doing particularly badly, but we seem to have convinced the capital markets that we need to have strict rules to control what we're doing and do watch us as we're trying to keep to those rules rather than having a more, I feel like not relaxed, but more confident approach. And there's already been, as you know, a change in the way in which we even look at government spending in terms of how you calculate it as part of the debt, in the sense that if it gives you compensation later on, faster growth assets that really have improved in their quality and value, then you can reduce that from the overall debt because you're having something positive happening with the money that you've invested in the future. So it actually counts as a positive rather than negative. I think the markets need a little bit more convincing of that, and a little bit more of a confident tone would make quite a difference rather than being forced to find, you're stuck in a corner that you can't actually get out of, which I think is what had happened with the previous administration.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing is that if the markets are convinced that he is going to stay the course, we've had a rapid succession of prime ministers, because he is providing something called vision, which was lacking perhaps before, then that has a dividend too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Taking the market with you in a way, or taking businesses with you too, matters hugely, because at the end of the day, it is businesses which are going to go and invest, and also the consumer who's going to feel possibly more confident to go and spend. So business and consumer confidence will have to be the things he focuses on.
I talked about vision, and I think one of the things that he is, he's certainly more charismatic than his predecessor. I think the perception in the polls is, and therefore we have seen the polls even out between Reform on the right and Labour in the middle or on the left somewhere. We're yet to find out. But he also seems to have this vision, and I'm not sure whether it comes from his more left-wing convictions or because he thinks the economy works this way, or because of artificial intelligence. He's saying people who use their hands, the trades, need to be more adequately compensated for their work. Do economic trends support that or not?
Well, what you tend to look at when you look at a particular sector is the productivity in that sector. So what is it that you can produce per hour? And there are some low productivity sectors around. And I'm afraid one of those has been, I mentioned them already, so retail and hospitality. It doesn't mean that they're not worthwhile. It means basically that they're not fantastically productive by comparison to, let's say, being in the oil sector, maybe, or in the pharmaceutical sector, or in banking, where you get paid an awful lot more because the income you produce is considerably higher, and the profits perhaps of the companies that are there also reflect that. And we tended to always associate in our calculations, and certainly when I was working as a government economist, we looked at productivity as a way to estimate what the productivity is in a particular sector. You look at what they get paid. And I'm afraid if you just look at that. You assume that you get highly paid because you're very productive. So that really leaves quite a lot of professionals, if we want to call them that. And a lot of the discussion now, of course, is centered on care workers. Are they paid enough? I think Andy Burnham said there should be perhaps the highest paid people because they provide such a big value to the community, if you like. If you can start looking at things from the social value perspective, rather than necessarily what profits they might create, and we all decide if we're thinking more in a left-wing way, that we should compensate those that are providing some benefit like this. So it's a social outcome which is really, really beneficial. Therefore, we need to pay them more. Fine. Someone's going to pay for it. So are we prepared to pay more taxes to pay them better? Are we going to get rid of private sector providers in the care service? Because, of course, they won't be able to afford to pay many higher wages to many of the people who work for them. Is this then going to become a little bit like the National Health Service in the sense that it all becomes done by the public sector, pays a certain amount in accordance to what you think they contribute to the health of the economy? All these things, of course, have very positive economic outcomes in the end. So again, as an economist, what you think is, if we do that, are we going to have a better or happier, but also a healthier population? Are we going to be able to maybe take away some of the pressure in the National Health Service by having better care service because you're paying these people better to provide that service and have more of them doing it? So you've got to think long term. And I think that's where possibly what Andy Burnham is bringing is quite positive, because he talks about his 10-year plan. And on the economic front, a lot of what may need to be done isn't going to lead to anything other than higher costs in the short term, but in the longer term, it could actually be quite positive.
Yeah. And this really is the fundamental question, is to what extent do you adjust a market economy? Because, as you rightly say, people would have to pay electricians and so on more. To what extent do you adjust a market economy and intervene in order to get to a different point? Because a market economy works from day to day, month to month. And if you're looking for a longer term outcome, you have to intervene. The question is where and how, right? Is that his thinking?
Well, yes, but of course you intervene. If companies aren't going to do it, what you do, which has already been announced by the previous administration anyway, you give them incentives to do so. So subsidies. So you pay them a certain amount if they employ people on apprenticeships, for example. Or
good example.
So you can do that, but of course, as I said before, it's costly in the short term. So the question is, can you justify it by looking at the longer term? And again, if it means you have to borrow more, then you have to convince the markets that this is actually good for the longer term and that there will be a growth path, which is going to be able, therefore, to pay back its debt quite easily, or more easily than would otherwise have been the case.
So as an economist looking at this, how quickly does he need to start talking about the debt burden and growth rates for the UK? Because, as I said, the growth rate is low. About 1% is the prediction for this year. That's not high at all. But it's not a disaster. It's certainly not a recession. But he, in order to generate taxes, you need to generate growth. How quickly does he need to start demonstrating that he can deliver that?
Well, we're going to have a budget. One assumes sometime in possibly October. I mean, the sooner the better. Because what you see normally in the UK, or you've seen that anyway in the last 3 years, not normally, it's certainly since this Labour government was elected, is that nothing happens in the summer or in the second half of the year while you're waiting for this budget to tell you whether your taxes are going to be going up and where exactly. And then growth resumes, and then you stop again, waiting for the next budget to come. And I'm afraid we may well be in exactly this position now, although the Burnham sort of, if you like, change that has taken place in terms of making people feel a little bit more confident. We've seen some indications of that. And as you said in your summary, in the opinion polls, we've seen Labour go above reform after a long time. So if that continues, then perhaps we're not going to see quite the flatlining that we saw last year in the second half of the year. But let's hope, therefore, that we get the budget soon enough so that any speculation about it sort of disappears.
Just quickly, I just wanted to talk to you about the international scene. it seems to slightly have slipped off the headlines, but this conflict between the US and Iran is ongoing. And of course, we were talking before we went into record about Poland and Ukraine and so on. None of that is constructive, obviously, when we're looking at growth rates. And in the particular case of Iran, it affects inflation in the end, because an oil price is an internationally set value. So do you worry about the path of inflation and whether interest rates coming down are going to help the new Prime Minister in the UK out of it?
Well, yes, I think that matters hugely. So in terms of the room for manoeuvre, and the interesting thing is that interest rates, short-term interest rates by the Bank of England or any other central bank are very closely correlated with the yields that you pay. Not the exact number, but if you raise, or if there is any expectation of inflation going up and you raise your short-term interest rates, then you have something correspondent happening also in the bond markets. So it's a good indicator what happens at the central bank level, the cost of borrowing for the government in the future, which will matter hugely. And the decisions, of course, on interest rates are made particularly on inflation. And we've just had the Bank of England keeping interest rates unchanged and saying that perhaps their expectations of inflation have come down a little bit to what they expected even a month ago.
But that's always the job of an economist. It's a difficult one. Thank you very much indeed for sparing the time to talk to me on the Talk Diaries. And I guess at this stage, it's August. We can just keep our fingers crossed. Right?
Indeed. And maybe the heat wave will go.
Well, yeah, that's the other problem for me anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you.